Have you ever had that strange dream where you suddenly realize you're floating above your body, looking down at yourself sleeping? Maybe it felt so real you woke up with goosebumps. Now, what if I told you there was a man who not only experienced this repeatedly, but built an entire system to explore it, and even got the attention of the US government during the Cold War? His name was Robert Monroe. To some, he was a pioneer. To others, a mystic. But to the CIA, he was a man who might hold the keys to a hidden frontier, the human mind's ability to travel beyond space and time. Let's rewind. Robert Monroe wasn't a monk meditating in the Himalayas. He wasn't a yogi spending years in silence. He was a successful American businessman in the 1950s, running radio networks and producing shows. A practical, material guy. That's what makes his story so shocking, because Monroe stumbled into the unknown by accident. It all started with an experiment. He wanted to use sound frequencies to enhance learning and memory. You know, a typical ambitious entrepreneur idea. What if music or certain tones could help people learn languages faster or absorb information while they sleep? But instead of just improving memory, Monroe noticed something strange. The people listening to his sound tapes began reporting unusual experiences, floating sensations, vibrations in the body, and even feeling as if they were outside themselves. And then it happened to him too. One night, while lying in bed listening to his own frequency experiments, Monroe felt paralyzed. A buzzing filled his ears. And then he was out of his body, floating near the ceiling, looking down at his own form. Can you imagine the shock? Imagine one moment you're just lying in bed, and the next you're hovering in the air, staring at yourself as if you're two people at once. This experience changed everything. Monroe was hooked. The explorer of the afterlife. Instead of brushing it off as a weird hallucination, Monroe decided to document, test, and repeat it. He started experimenting night after night, learning how to control these out-of-body experiences. And here's the wild part. He claimed these weren't just dreams. He described traveling to other dimensions, interacting with non-physical beings, and even glimpsing what happens after death. In his classic book, Journeys Out of the Body, Monroe describes a reality where the soul can detach from the physical body and roam freely, not limited by space, not bound by time. To him, these OBEs, out-of-body experiences, were as real as walking down the street. Of course, skeptics rolled their eyes. It's just the brain playing tricks, they said. Sleep paralysis, hallucinations, chemicals firing. But here's the thing. Monroe wasn't a mystic talking about visions. He was a methodical guy. He recorded, he categorized, he analyzed. He built a framework that anyone could test. And that framework? It caught the attention of some very powerful people. Enter the CIA. The Cold War wasn't just about nuclear weapons or rocket ships. Behind the scenes, there was a hidden war for the mind. Could psychic abilities, remote viewing, or out-of-body travel give one side an edge? The CIA thought maybe yes. Monroe's research into sound frequencies and OBEs aligned perfectly with what intelligence agencies were quietly exploring. Ways to train humans to project consciousness across space and gather information. In fact, Monroe's Hemi-Sync technology, which used sound waves to synchronize the left and right hemispheres of the brain, became a central piece of what later became known as the CIA's gateway process. Declassified documents now confirm this. Think about that for a moment. A US intelligence agency took Monroe's methods seriously enough to integrate them into their own secret experiments. Why? Because if Monroe was right, then the human mind wasn't trapped inside the skull. It could move across space, even peek into the future. And in the chessboard of the Cold War, that kind of ability was priceless. The Afterlife Files. But here's where Monroe's story goes from fascinating to mind-blowing. As his OBEs grew more advanced, Monroe reported encounters that seemed to reveal what happens when we die. He described realms where newly deceased souls wandered in confusion, others where beings radiated wisdom and love, and even zones where collective thought created entire landscapes. He called some of these regions the Locale I and Locale III dimensions. Strange names, but for Monroe, they were as real as Chicago or New York. He suggested that death isn't the end, but rather a transition into another frequency of existence. In his view, the soul leaves the physical vehicle behind and continues the journey in another form. This wasn't vague mysticism. Monroe gave vivid descriptions, mapped out repeatable techniques, and even trained others to do it at the Monroe Institute, which still operates today. People from all walks of life, scientists, doctors, even military officers, came to learn how to step beyond the body. And the experiences many reported? Shockingly similar. The Institute, the CIA, and Journeys Beyond. Imagine this. Deep in the Virginia countryside, there's a quiet facility nestled among the trees. From the outside, it looks like a simple retreat, but inside, people are lying in darkened rooms with headphones on, listening to strange, pulsing sounds. Some of them claim they're flying through the cosmos. Others say they're visiting relatives who passed away years ago. And a few report looking down at planet Earth itself from above the atmosphere. This isn't science fiction. This is the Monroe Institute, founded by Robert Monroe in the 1970s. Monroe created it as a laboratory for consciousness. His goal? To help ordinary people experience extraordinary states of awareness, without drugs, without rituals, just using sound. The secret of Hemi-Sync. Here's where Monroe's genius came in. He discovered that by playing slightly different tones in each ear, say 100 Hz in one ear and 104 Hz in the other, the brain naturally tries to reconcile the difference. The result is a third phantom beat of 4 Hz created inside your head. This phenomenon is called a binaural beat, and Monroe trademarked his version as Hemi-Sync, short for hemispheric synchronization. Why does this matter? Because when the left and right hemispheres of the brain start syncing up to these beats, people report entering states of deep meditation, lucid dreams, and yes, out-of-body experiences. It's like hacking your brain into higher frequencies of consciousness. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just New Age fluff. Medical doctors, neuroscientists, and even military personnel tested it. Some of them walked away convinced Monroe had cracked open a doorway. The CIA's gateway. Now, remember the Cold War context. While Monroe was fine-tuning his Hemi-Sync, the CIA and US Army were secretly investigating psychic abilities. Things like remote viewing, telepathy, and even influencing physical matter with thought. In 1983, a now famous CIA report called Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process was written. It directly references Monroe's methods. The document outlines how altered brain states using Monroe's Hemi-Sync tapes could theoretically allow a person to step outside time-space, to access information beyond normal perception. That's not a YouTuber conspiracy theory. That's straight from declassified US government files. The CIA essentially admitted Robert Monroe might have discovered a practical way to tune human consciousness like a radio, dialing into higher channels of reality. Journeys into the afterlife. But Monroe wasn't just interested in psychic spying. For him, the real treasure was understanding what happens after death. He described entering what he called focus levels, altered states of consciousness where different realities unfolded. For example, Focus 10, the mind-awake, body-asleep state, perfect for initiating OBEs. Focus 21, the bridge to other dimensions. Focus 27, a realm he described as a kind of reception center for souls who had just died. In Focus 27, Monroe claimed there were vast parks where souls could rest, heal, and meet guides before deciding their next journey. He described it as serene, luminous, and profoundly welcoming, a spiritual hospital of sorts for the newly departed. And here's what gives chills. Countless people who trained at his institute reported visiting the same place. They described similar landscapes, guides, and experiences, even when they didn't know each other. Was this mass imagination, or were they all tuning in to an actual afterlife dimension? Encounters with higher beings. As Monroe's journeys deepened, he claimed contact with entities far beyond human. Some he saw as helpers, beings of pure light who guided him through difficult transitions. Others he felt were watchers, observing humanity with a kind of detached curiosity. One of his most profound realizations was that consciousness doesn't end at death, it expands. He described humans as eternal travelers, temporarily inhabiting physical bodies, but always connected to a greater field of awareness. He even suggested that Earth itself is a kind of school for souls, a training ground where we learn, grow, and evolve through the challenges of physical life. If true, then life isn't just random chaos. Every joy, every struggle, every heartbreak could be part of a grand curriculum for the soul. Skeptics, science, and the mystery. Of course, not everyone bought it. Skeptics insisted Monroe's OBEs were nothing more than hallucinations triggered by brain chemistry, maybe a mix of sleep paralysis and imagination. But here's the counterpoint. Why did so many people using Monroe's methods report nearly identical experiences? Why did the CIA, an organization obsessed with practicality, invest time and money into exploring his work if it was just fantasy? Even today, neuroscientists studying near-death experiences find eerie similarities with Monroe's maps of consciousness. From tunnels of light to meetings with guides, his descriptions continue to resonate. This is the heart of the story. Monroe wasn't selling religion. He wasn't trying to start a cult. He was an engineer of consciousness, mapping out terrains that billions of humans wonder about but fear to explore. Monroe's legacy and the final journey. As Robert Monroe aged, he never stopped exploring. In fact, some of his most profound journeys happened later in life. He no longer feared death because he believed he had already peeked behind the curtain. In his third book, Ultimate Journey, Monroe wrote about an experience that shook him to his core. He claimed to have encountered his I There, a vast collective of all his past, present, and future selves across different lifetimes. Imagine suddenly realizing you're not just you. You're also the child you once were, the elderly version you will become, and countless other versions living in parallel realities. All of them connected like branches on one immense tree of consciousness. For Monroe, this was the ultimate truth. We are far more than individual personalities. We are eternal streams of awareness, temporarily wearing human masks, preparing for the final exit. By the 1990s, Monroe knew his time in this body was coming to an end. But unlike most people, he didn't dread it. He described death as shifting focus, like tuning a radio from one channel to another. In 1995, Monroe passed away peacefully at age 79. But here's the eerie twist. Many people who had trained at the Monroe Institute claimed they sensed his presence guiding them in their meditations even after his death. Some reported vivid encounters with Monroe in Focus 27, the very afterlife realm he had mapped decades before. Was this proof that he really transitioned just as he described? Or was it simply the power of belief echoing through his students' minds? The Institute lives on. Today, the Monroe Institute is still active, attracting seekers, scientists, veterans, and curious explorers from all over the world. people continue to use Monroe's Hemi-Sync technology to experience altered states, lucid dreams, and sometimes journeys beyond the body. The CIA's Gateway Process Report, once classified, is now publicly available, sparking a new wave of interest in Monroe's work. Young people on TikTok and YouTube are rediscovering his tapes, testing his methods, and asking the same question Monroe once did. What if consciousness is not bound by the body? Visionary or dreamer? So, who was Robert Monroe, really? A visionary who cracked open the door to the afterlife? A curious tinkerer whose brainwave experiments accidentally created mass hallucinations? Or maybe, just maybe, a bridge between science and spirituality, daring to map territories that religions guarded and scientists ignored. One thing is certain, his work has left ripples that still spread today. Near-death experiencers, quantum physicists, and spiritual seekers all find echoes of Monroe's discoveries in their own paths. The big takeaway. Here's what Monroe wanted us to know. You are more than your body. You are more than your mind. You are a traveler in a vast, multi-dimensional universe. Every night when you dream, you're already stepping beyond the physical. Every deep meditation, every moment of stillness is a chance to feel the edge of something bigger. And when the day comes that you leave this world, according to Monroe, it won't be the end. It will simply be the next leg of an infinite journey. The final question. So, I'll leave you with this. When you close your eyes tonight and drift into sleep, what if that gentle float you feel isn't just imagination? What if it's the beginning of your own journey, the same path Robert Monroe walked, one that leads not away from life, but deeper into its mystery? Because if Monroe was even partly right, then death is not a wall, it's a doorway. And behind that doorway, the adventure continues. That's Robert Monroe, the man who brought back secrets from the afterlife. His legacy challenges us to live with less fear and more curiosity, because maybe, just maybe, we are all explorers of something far greater than we ever imagined.